Hi, AJ Hartley here, novelist, Shakespeare professor, fan of various aspects of Japanese music and culture, and today I'm going to be talking about a couple of TV shows which have a shared interest in Japanese office politics, among other things. One is called Pride of the Temp, the other is called No Side Manager, or No Side Game as it was in Japan. As I say, they're connected by a couple of things, but let's start by looking at Pride of the Temp.
Thinking of upskilling but don't know where to start? Haruko has some ideas for you. You can be a flamenco dancer, a tuna filleting professional, a natural disaster expert, then even a lift rescue personnel? Expand your skill set with the Pride of the Temp.
So there are 2 seasons of Pride of the Temp, but they were released a significant time apart. The first season came out in 2007, and the second season didn't come out until 2020. So 13 years later. The show stars Ryoko Shinohara as Haruko Omai, who's the primary character, and the supporting cast includes Kotaro Koizumi and Yo Oizumi, who's also the lead in No Side Manager. So I'll get to that in a second. So the show is a concept-driven drama with comic elements. And the premise of the show is that a lot of Japanese companies increasingly have come to rely on temporary employees, people who are only contracted for a few months, who are paid at a lower rate, whose contracts are frequently terminated either at the end of their short-term contract or after a few renewals. They don't have a long-term investment in the company, they don't get bonuses, and they don't make as much money. So this is a radical shift from traditional Japanese business models. And the idea being scrutinized in the show, and to a certain extent in No Side Manager as well, is this traditional idea about the centrality of the company to Japanese life and to the well-being of its employees. The old idea was that you get a college degree, you join a company, and you work with that company pretty much all your life in many cases. And the company becomes a kind of surrogate family. They work with you, they train you up, you work through the system, you get promoted, you make more money, you retire, they look after you, and so on. The hours are very long. There's a culture of sort of codependence within the business, and things like, office drinking parties and stuff like that were all considered part of the community, and various other things what Western businesses would consider very peripheral, and a lot of workers would think were intrusive, invasive in terms of their work-life balance and such. These things were very common in Japan. The state of the Japanese economy has created all kinds of challenges to this particular model of business. And one of the consequences is that businesses are relying more and more on temporary employees who are paid at a lower rate, as I say. And from the perspective of the show, they're frequently looked down on, they're exploited, they're expected to behave as if they are long-term employees, even though they don't get the perks of being a long-term employee. So, enter Omai. And Omai is the sort of super temp. She has experience in all kinds of different things. She can do practically anything. She's super efficient and utterly uninvested in the company. She'll come in, she'll earn her money, she'll work hard for 3 months, and then she takes off to Spain and lives a completely different kind of life until it's time for her to go back to work. In other words, the implication is when she's run out of money or whatever. It's not entirely clear. But she doesn't buy into the logic of the corporate business model as a way of sustaining individual employees. She has no investment long term, which means that she clocks in at a very specific time. She clocks out for lunch. She clocks out at 5 o'clock in the evening, and she doesn't do overtime. She refuses to do anything that's not contracted. She's paid at a higher rate than most people because she's incredibly good at her job, but she does not consider this her life, which also means that she has no interest in forming personal relationships.
Dear colleagues, please join us in welcoming our newest team member, Haruko.
私を雇って後悔はさせません。
With a wealth of experience, she'll definitely help our business break new ground. Feel free to reach out to her, either for lunch
行きません。
or any team activities.
As a show, as I say, it's a sort of comic drama, and it's slightly odd. I mean, it's odd in a number of ways because it sort of walks an odd line between being occasionally quite realist and small and thoughtful and reflective about actual people, and other times it's really quite broad in its comic approach, and you'll see a lot of sort of over-the-top acting, very sort of stylized and gestural. Omai has a sort of part-time gig. It doesn't even seem necessarily to be an actually paid position, but because of her connections to Spain, she also, somewhat bizarrely, works as a flamenco dancer in a Spanish bar in Tokyo. And this seems to inform a lot of very dramatic, stylized positioning, which she incorporates in her everyday life, including in her office work. So she is absolutely not the sort of shy, demure, very small presence that low-level female employees tend to be expected to behave as within Japanese businesses.
あれうまいお茶っ葉はいつもと同じなんですでも入れ方が違うんですよね
それが何か。
それじゃあスーパー派遣さんとやらもう一杯おかわりくれ
12時なので失礼します。
おいなんだおい
お前さんの勤務条件ですか
So her manner is off-putting, it's abrupt, she's very frank, very direct in her opinions, but she's also extremely competent. And she's the driving force of practically every episode because she's the only person who can come in and save the day because she has this sort of ridiculous range of different certifications and areas of expertise. But considering that she's so central to the plot of each episode, we don't see her develop and mature that much. And what's slightly odd about the show is that there isn't a clear arc for her character, even though there's a second season. Even by the time we get to the end of season 2, she seems kind of the same. And I don't think I'm giving anything away. It's not a spoiler. I have no idea if there's likely to be a third season. I suppose it's possible. But the show doesn't seem particularly interested in unpacking who she is and what she's all about. We have to sort of infer things from her. But her primary purpose in the show is to be a catalyst for the workplace and for the people around her, presenting a challenge to this idea of the traditional Japanese corporate office culture and the way that people invest in it. Because what she does and what she seems to inspire other people to do is divest themselves from a sense of personal well-being and personal worth, which is tied to work. And this, I think, is fascinating, particularly in Japan, because these two things have been so closely enmeshed for so long. And this is a show that seems to challenge that assumption and to say that, clocking in and clocking out and not thinking about work at all, not being connected to it, giving yourself time to have relationships and other kinds of fun, other kinds of identity, other kinds of hobbies and pastimes and all the rest of it is positive, maybe even essential for ordinary people. As I say, the oddity of it is that we don't actually see her doing those things beyond being in the flamenco bar and having all these other odd skill sets. So Do we actually succeed? Does the show succeed in giving us an alternative? I'm not sure. The two seasons have slightly different focuses. The first one is very much about this premise, the idea of the super competent temp who everybody kind of looks down on, but is the only person who knows how to do their job, while the other employees, especially the male employees, are busy glad-handing and sitting around and doing nothing and waiting for the boss man to go home because they can't leave before him, and doing the things that and sucking up to him and all that other stuff that is often associated with the Japanese workplace.
大前さんが残業？
あの大前春子が残業？
大前さん、ありがとう。俺のために徹夜してくれて。やっぱり俺のこと言って何すんだいきなりお前。
肺が止まってましたが何か。
肺なんか止まってねえよ。何言ってんだお前。
So the first season's premise is to challenge this idea that temps are somehow lesser employees than the salarymen and their female equivalent who are long-term employees of the company. And that, I think, is really interesting, and it raises serious challenges and questions. The other thing, of course, is that not only is the show about the work-life balance of the employees and their own sort of mental state and happiness and contentment and so on, it's also about economics. It's also about the fact that Japan has been struggling to get out of that 90s economic collapse. The idea that these old office systems, not only are they not good for the employees, they're also ultimately not good for business. I say they're not good for employees, and I particularly mean for certain kinds of employees, not just the temps, but the low-level people, right? The younger employees who have to share more of the work, who have to do more of the fixing of other people's problems and are getting paid less than the people higher up the tree whose knowledge is obsolete, who don't keep up with the technology, who don't know how to stay on top of things and do things efficiently, and who are most of the time, out playing golf and doing things that are associated with business but aren't actually work. And these things get satirized in a lot of Japanese shows. I was talking about Talentless Takano a few weeks ago, which does something very similar, and Agretsuko, and a lot of other shows. This is a familiar dynamic of people channeling their frustration with the economic situation in Japan towards familiar targets within the Japanese workforce, particularly old incompetent guys who have sort of worked their way to the top by glad-handing and being connected and being present, right? That's a very Japanese thing within the office, but not actually being particularly capable or working especially hard, or at least not recently, right? So the season 1 is focused on that core issue. Season 2 is a little darker. It's immediately going after more contemporary issues like sexual harassment of junior employees and temps. But in the course of the show, it also starts to engage with AI. And again, the focus is both economic and personal. The AI, as is represented in the show, is more a kind of evil supercomputer than it is true AI. But the point is a good one. And the point is that a lot of people's jobs, especially in this old school model, cannot be justified by a hard analysis. And a lot of these employees are going to get designated for forced retirement or firing. So as the show raises questions about who's doing the real work, the second season particularly raises questions about what the nature of that work is, what the function of these companies are for the good of Japan as a whole, and for the good of both the employees and the people who buy their products, what use these companies are if they come to be completely dominated by AI. The company in question is a food production and distribution company. So, as with a lot of Japanese shows dealing with food, there are many episodes that focus on the people who make the food and what those people are trying to do. And it's often very personal. And it's often about communicating with other people and sharing something that matters to you with customers through the food that you make. There is no place for that in the AI model. Now, I don't know if the show goes far enough in trying to critique or offer an alternative to the AI which is taking over, but it raises some very uncomfortable questions and leaves them kind of unanswered. That we're looking at a world coming up very, very fast where we're going to have to seriously reevaluate what we want from business in terms of providing employment rather than simply providing profits for whoever owns the companies. So that's an idea I can get behind. As I say, some of the show is really quite broad. It's also occasionally quite poignant. And you find yourself rooting for people more and more. I wasn't sure about the show initially, and it took me a while to get into it. It's uneven. There are moments in both seasons where I thought it had kind of lost its sense of direction. I struggle occasionally when it shifts from things that are seemingly quite realist to these slightly ridiculously oversized solutions that come specifically from the super temp, right, who's able to do pretty much everything. And in some ways that lowers the stakes. You always know there's some kind of escape, that she's always going to be able to fix things. So that, it's not a flawless show by any means, but I do find it occasionally really interesting and funny and occasionally quite touching. I wish some of the personal connections and relationships were pursued all the way through. There's an odd sense in which the show is sort of bouncing in different directions, episode to episode, even moments within an episode. So sometimes you think you're moving towards some kind of real discovery or conclusion, and then it'll go off at an odd angle, and that element of the story will kind of disappear. I particularly thought we would get a greater sense of closure at the end of season 2, but we really don't. Now, maybe, as I say, that means that they're talking about developing a season 3. I would watch it if there was one, but I don't know. The other show that I was going to talk about is called No Side Manager. At least that's the name on Netflix. In Japan, it was No Side Game. And this also stars Yo Oizumi, who is a really fine physical comic. And his stuff in Pride of the Temp is some of the most fun parts of the show, as this sort of flashy manager who is sort of simultaneously attracted to and intimidated by the super temp, and his inability to get some kind of personal relationship going with her is both funny and compelling. His role in No Side Manager is different. The comedy is much more muted. This is not really a comic show, it's a drama. And the premise of the show is that, again, it's set in part in a Japanese company, a car manufacturing company. And because of office politics, he's kind of banished to a subsidiary company in a different part of the country where he also has to take responsibility for, as GM, as general manager, of the company's rugby team. This sounds really bizarre, but these things actually exist, right? Companies will have their own sports team. And this is what I'm saying about the way that the company model is quite different in Japan, where the company is something that is supposed to be kind of all-encompassing, that it fills all your time, that it becomes familial, it becomes something that you're involved with at all occasions, and they will have their own sports teams, for instance, right? So he's put in charge of the rugby team, and he knows nothing about rugby. So there's a kind of Ted Lasso kind of dynamic here as well. He's not interested in rugby. He resents the fact that he's there. He doesn't understand the game, and the players don't trust him, which is also a sort of Ted Lasso kind of dynamic. And he's constantly having to fight for, on the one hand, he's told that the team needs to achieve and be good because the CEO is still invested in the rugby team, but nobody else is. But at the same time, he has no budget for training facilities and exercise equipment and all the other things that he needs. And nobody in the community is interested in the rugby team. So he has to also do kind of grassroots fundraising and community activity and raising the profile and building the fan base and all that kind of stuff. But he has to win over the team. He has to convince them that he's the right person to do this. He has to bring in the right coach. He has to get on the right side of certain key players and so on, and it's actually quite fascinating. And a lot of the show takes place in the sort of on the rugby field and the training and so on. But all the way through, there's this sort of running parallel with his connections to the business and trying to sort of navigate more money and various other things for the team through this sort of competing system in the head office. And though he has the CEO is on his side, the CEO is elderly and is about to be replaced. It looks like there's going to be some kind of internal coup. And so he has to deal with the sort of politicking and maneuvering of these other people, some of whom cannot be trusted at all. The other thing that we get in No Side Manager that we don't get in Pride of the Temp is that we get to see his family life. He has a wife and two sons who are also sort of by definition thrown into the same kind of situation that he's in, and now they have to move, they have to live through this shift in their own status and their own family, and he's trying to raise the interest in rugby. And of course, in the course of the show, he becomes more invested and more excited and more determined to try and make the team successful. And, it's a much more sort of heartwarming kind of story. It's a much more ostensibly realist story than Pride of the Temp, where there are sort of outlandish situations which is mirrored in the acting and so on. By comparison, No Side Manager is a much more realist drama, but it's tracing similar concerns about how people within Japanese businesses find contentment. If the work itself, which for years was supposed to give you everything you needed, if it becomes clear that it's not doing, if it's because of economic constraints or a sort of breakdown of the social structure, or the fact that, younger people are like, we're not going to go along with these old rules anymore. It doesn't serve us. We don't want to do it. Plus, of course, the workforce is getting smaller all the time because the birth rate is so low, because people can't have families, because they can't build relationships, because they're spending all their time at work. So there are real issues at the heart of these shows. So in No Side Manager, the focus of the show becomes about trying to find fulfillment on the rugby field or in the stands watching the rugby team. And as I say, it's quite inspiring. I mean, there are parts, the inspirational stuff in terms of the general manager's big speeches can get a little relentless. It starts to feel like Henry V at times, but you're still rooting for this guy, who's kind of a fish out of water and doesn't know what he's doing, but is trying to do his best for the team, for his family, and sort of indirectly for himself and for principles and values that are not clearly being upheld by the rest of the company. Unlike Pride of the Temp, which is very episodic and doesn't clearly have an overall arc, this is a story that has a specific narrative trajectory. It's a one-season show. I'd love to see a second, but the show resolves itself within that one season. And we get to see the maturation of the team and various other things along the way, the ups and downs of the various struggles. And I kind of loved it. It has a great theme song by Kenshi Yonezu, whose Lemon song was used in Unnatural, another show that I've reviewed before and really enjoyed.
これが愛じゃなければ何と呼ぶのか僕は知らなかった呼べよ花の名前をただ一つだけ張り裂けるくらいに鼻先が増える呼吸が止まる痛みは消えないままでいい
So, you know, it's worth watching for that alone. I really recommend it. I think that Pride of the Temp might be a tougher watch for a lot of Westerners. I think it justifies the time, but it's inconsistent. And there are times when you just feel like the solutions to the various problems are a little predictable and get a little samey. There's still really interesting stuff in it, and some of it is really fun. But yeah, I think No Side Manager is a better show. It's more sentimental, it's more feel good, and that might be a point against it from some people's perspective. But it also, I think it earns most of that sentimentality, fairly. And there are moments in it that are really emotionally powerful, ups and downs. That I don't want to say too much about because I don't want to spoil the show, but I would definitely recommend it. I think and again, it's only the one season, and I think it's really well done. So yes, and both of these shows will give you a little bit more insight into the positives and negatives, the evolution of the Japanese office culture, I think. That's all I'm going to say. As ever, please like, comment, subscribe. Check out my books, particularly, of course, my Japanese books, the Hideki Smith series, which are available, books 1 and 2 in English. Book 1 is also available in Japanese and in a bilingual edition. Check out my Patreon page. My patrons get to see these videos before anybody else, and their support helps to keep this channel going. I have a little dashery store for shirts and mugs and things like that. And that's it. I will talk to you again soon. Cheers. Bye.